Thank you very much. Welcome back to this special discussion segment on our independence anniversary. We're still live in our studios at the headquarters in Lagos. And here we're moving on to something fairly different, but equally important. And here we're talking about social investment. And in this regard, we'll ask the question, what kind of investment have successive governments made in the quality of life of Nigerians? It is said that human capital development through social programs is one way of measuring this investment, from the school feeding program to the trader money initiative. That's just from the most current government. Has the quality of life of the average Nigerian improved through that? Well, joining us to discuss this is Mr. Ben Akabueze, who is the Director General of the Office of Budget. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, Mr. Muda Yusuf is also the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you so much for joining us. Professor Ishak Oloyede is the Registrar of the Joint Admissions and Matriculations Board. Thank you so much for joining us.
And we also have the Vice President of the CIPM, that's the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, Mr. Wale Adedinro. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Mr. Akabueze, let me start with you, looking at funding for SIP projects, for instance. Looking at 2016 to 2017, we look at the amount of money disbursed, and then the amount of money appropriated is not quite the same. Maybe 500 billion in 2016 budgeted, and then you find less than that appropriated in the end. Why is it that you have this amount of money budgeted, and then not all of it is appropriated at the end of the day?
Well, first of all, the budget is an estimate. It's based on certain assumptions. And there are two sides of the budget. You have the revenues, you have the expenditures. If the revenues don't come in full, for some reason you're also not able to borrow, given that you're running a deficit budget, the amounts that you projected, then you cannot spend all that you planned to spend. That's a general principle. Speaking about the social investment program, it was important to the government not to spend for the sake of spending. And so you had to ramp up the expenditure. And that if you take some of the components, like the school feeding, it wasn't just a school feeding program, it was a homegrown school feeding program. So the process of identifying the providers, going through all of that procurement process.
Yeah, but was that not taken into consideration when the budgeting was happening? Because if you find do you budget and then you begin to look for who the beneficiaries should be? Because we were listening to the finance minister this morning, and she said, oh, there's a whole process to identify beneficiaries and then identify those who is eventually going to end up with. So
the budget for 2018, for instance, was prepared way back in August 2017. And so that budget is designed to run from January 2018 to December 2018. So at the time that you're preparing the budget in August 2017, you have a plan for certain things to happen. So you project so you have a plan for, yes.
If the funding and the appropriation does not get there, what hope is there for the proper implementation of that project?
At the time when you drew up the budget, you didn't know the funding will not materialize. If you knew, you will not. I mean, the appropriation is simply the case of getting that, your estimate passed into law by the National Assembly. Funding is a different matter. There are two broad components of the funding. You've got to generate the revenues. So you project at the time when you're drawing up the budget, you have your estimate about what oil prices will be. You have an estimate about what oil production will be. So if you take 2017, you projected that oil production would average 2.2 million barrels per day, because indeed the capacity exists to produce even more than that. At the end of the day, actual production came in at an average of 1.86 million barrels per day. They're already just on that line, you won't meet your targets.
Okay, I'm sorry to have to go back to it again, but I'm going to have to say much ado about social investment projects and budgeting. If you start from Operation Feed the Nation in the 70s, Green Revolution in the 80s, we keep going, Better Life Program, 87, MAPSA, 87, Poverty Eradication Program, 2007, You Win, Shopee. Each of them suffered a setback due to problems bordering on finance, implementation, development. So what we're asking is, what is different now if budgeting is still...
No, some of them didn't suffer from funding. Some of them indeed had the surface of funding, but, suffered from operational, lapses. Here, I mean, if you take, for instance, the conditional cash transfer, you've got to build up the register. There is not enough funding, even if you had the 500 billion naira, it is not enough to do all of that. So that's why if you take the school feeding, for instance, it's still, as of the last count, about 23 states. So you're wrapping up as you go. Of course, you can sit back and say, let's get everything, all of the arrangements in place, perfected before you start. That means, in your 4-year term as a government, you may just not, get to start.
Let me come to you, Mr. Adediro. Initiatives like trader money, for example, where you get small traders, very small ones, and give them 10,000 naira, virtually interest-free. They don't have to submit anything in return for it. They don't have to put up collateral and so on. Are we building a culture of dependency? Because people like you would say, oh, yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's building up the capital base and so on. But do we not then get people into the idea that government owes them something and that if they get this money, it's their own share of whatever it is that others are sharing, and that as they take it, they are never coming back until there's another one. Whereas the whole idea is that you take it, you use it, you return it, then you get something bigger. They don't want to get anything bigger. They just grab this and run off.
Well, Ladi, it doesn't happen that way in every case. Our institute delivers value through people, and that should actually be the focus of the entire nation. Our people are the most important capital that we have, but that capital can turn into a huge liability if we don't put it to work. And I think what that scheme is about is to put people to work. And imagine what happens. For some of these petty traders, 5,000 naira is a lot of money. It's a huge capital for them. If they put it to work and they have enough resource, to put their children to school, not the kind of school that you and I will put our kids, but in any case, it will help to unleash the potentials of those children that otherwise would have been on the street hawking stuffs. So I think it's a very powerful program that can help to harness the otherwise neglected part of the human capital that we have in the country. But does it work in every case? Maybe not.
Why I say that is because when you take a look at previous schemes, some of them Ijoma has mentioned them, the rate of return of the first set of capital to be disbursed is very low. And therefore, most of the schemes get abandoned because the money doesn't come back for it to be regenerated
and then recycled.
And then, for the next set of people.
You have a point there. But look, I think there's a scheme that Ijoma missed, and that's the free education scheme. For me, that's the most powerful. Our professional institute members are the receiving end of the poor quality of graduates and products that is turned into the employment market. And we still have to make do. For instance, my institute runs what we call ready to market, because we discovered that university graduates from this country are just not prepared for work. You still have to do something to get them, ready to work. So there are some of the schemes that had really impacted positively. Prof is here. I'm sure he benefited from Chief Awolowo's free education scheme, because that's what my dad says, that most people from their generation actually became the anchor that drove the economy because there was free education. Otherwise, they would have ended up, in farms being peasant farmers.